Thanks for having me here today. The Big Lift has been what we've been, I guess, breathing and eating for the last 5 or 6 years. I know for most people it appears that it's been for a year and a half or 2 years. For some cyclists and pedestrians, I suspect they're now beginning to feel that it's been forever, but there is end in sight. This indeed is the largest project that we've dealt with at HHB since the building of the McKay Bridge in 1970. We're going to start off with a video. And this is we produced a series of videos that we put online. I think to this point in time we've got about 5 of them. At the end of the project, we're going to take all those videos plus some additional footage and try to produce a 22-minute, made for television little mini documentary so that people can use it. We did the same for the 3rd lane on the MacDonald Bridge. And I know that we do the old-fashioned thing. We still put it on discs, but we've handed those out to schools to the order of a couple thousand discs over the years that have been passed out. And it just tells the story of the 3rd lane. Anyway, if you wouldn't mind pushing the button, and we'll get this one underway. Hopefully the speaker's still alive. No, maybe just pull it back for a second. Works.
I was that kid that kind of.
Did you want the lights off, Steve?
I was that kid that kind of took things apart as soon as you got them and tried to put them back together just to see how they worked. You name it, I took it apart. I've always had an interest in the bridges. They're really neat structures to me.
If you ignore the maintenance program on a bridge and cannot safely accommodate traffic, then you have to close the bridge. Buying a new bridge is very expensive. We like to avoid that and maintain it.
I mean, this is a project for the generations. This will extend the life of this bridge for 75 years at least, and maybe more. We have a situation where there's corrosion happening underneath the deck, and eventually it will actually break free. So now's the time for us to get in there and repair it.
This bridge needs to be open each and every day, and so contractors working diligently, our staff are working diligently.
If it was easy, this wouldn't be only the 2nd time in the world that this has been done. If we started to talk about the obstacles, it would be like running an obstacle race every day. Wind speeds here tend to be higher.
If a snowstorm sneaks up on us,
Rain tends to come in sideways, not vertically. It really is a bit of a scheduling nightmare, as if the project wasn't complicated enough already. There are a total of 46 segments. It's kind of like a set of Lego blocks. Unfortunately, it's not as simple because our Lego blocks weigh 120 tons each. To think that you're going to have a gap in this bridge where the only thing that spans it is those 2 orange cables, and you're going to have that reconnected, that's amazing.
to have all of that happen and be open for traffic in the morning is pretty incredible. To date, this project has caused delays, and we're not happy with that. We're working very diligently to make sure that we reopen each and every morning on time. The piece about the performance was added last year after our second late opening in 1 week. I thought Monday was bad. Monday we didn't reopen. The first segment we put in, we didn't reopen until 9:30 on Monday morning, and it was like that was the end of the world. Then come Friday, we didn't reopen until 2:30. If there's any humor in all of that, we did have one person who sent us a tweet that said, "Very concerned you wouldn't have the bridge reopened in time to close it for this evening." So, a little bit about Halifax Harbour Bridges and who we are and what we've been doing. We were established in 1952. The primary purpose was to look at building a bridge to span the harbour. They had a couple of bridges prior to that. There were 2 bridges that were built up at the Narrows, accommodated train and I believe also pedestrians and wagons at the time. Both of those bridges disappeared. One in a storm and one silently slipped away in the middle of the night. They tell me the divers can still see some of the remnants of the second bridge on the bottom of the Narrows. After we were established, we opened the MacDonald Bridge in 1955. I think in our first year we had about 2.8 million vehicles travel across it. Within 7 or 8 years, the demand was so significant and growth was occurring so rapidly here in Dartmouth that they said, you know, we really need a second bridge. And plans got underway very quickly, and they worked on the McKay Bridge. A lot of debate on the location of where the McKay was going to go. Is it going to go up at the Narrows? Is it going to go down off the end of what's now the Cirque and run across to the south end? That was the preferred location at one point in time, and then Premier Stanfield stepped in and made a decision. I'm not sure if there's anything involved with this, but the property that he owned just south of St. Mary's would have seen a possible bridge coming down somewhere close to his backyard. I don't know all the details, but we do deal, we report to the province of Nova Scotia. We have 5 of our members who are appointed by the province, both our chair and our vice chair, so effectively control is in the hands of the province. There are 4 HRM appointees. In the past, all 4 of those were board members. Were councillors. Now 2 of them are councillors and 2 are from at large, public at large. And so that's good to have a greater diversity. The revenues that we generate go to maintain the bridges. We've only on a couple of occasions in the past 50, 60 years taken in funds from others. The province didn't want us to have a toll increase back in the 70s, so they kept writing checks to pay for our interest payments. Another time after the Skyway disaster in Florida, where the bridge was knocked down and 42 people died as a result of that, the federal government puts forward some money, and that money was spent building the riprap around the piers that we have in the water to provide protection from ships collision. So the money we get goes to maintain the bridges. We don't pass any money over to the government. They do have consolidated accounting, which means at the end of the day, if we have a profit, they get to claim it on their books, but we don't hand them any money. So essentially those who use the bridges are the ones who pay for the bridges. Okay. Yeah, away we go. A little bit about what this project is and what it isn't. In the beginning, people said to us, didn't you do this already? Back when we expanded the bridge from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, we did replace some of the deck, but that deck was on the approaches, which essentially is the, this doesn't show up on there. Put that away. What we replaced before was the 1,400 feet in Dartmouth on the approach and about the 500 feet we have here in Halifax. At the same time, we did take the bridge and we removed the bikeway that was, or the sidewalk that was inside, removed that to the outside. There was a cable tray on the north side that we also removed. The removal of those 2 components gave us enough width for the 3 lanes. And so I'll keep advancing things here. That's what we replaced back in '99, added the bikeway and sidewalk. Prior to us getting this project underway, there had been a lot of discussion in the cycling community about improving cycling conditions on the MacDonald Bridge. The board back in the early '90s didn't see much of a solution. There were a number of public meetings. When we decided that we were going to expand this bridge to 3 lanes, the first thing we did was we talked to government, we talked to cabinet, and then Premier Dr. Savage said, don't you even think of rebuilding that bridge without adding a dedicated bike lane. That was his message to us at that time. So we were quite happy to do so, dedicated bike lane and sidewalk. The project this time around is replacing, I'll back up a little bit. When we were replacing the deck on the approaches, we asked the engineer, well, why don't we replace the whole thing at the same time? And he said, you don't need to. You've got another 10 to 15 years of life in that deck. Use it, and when you need to get around to replacing it, do so then. So we put it off, and we were approached by the folks at COE, formerly Buckland and Taylor Engineering in Vancouver. They did a very similar project on the Lionsgate. They said, we've got the team and the expertise who have done that. The Lionsgate and the MacDonald are virtually twins, designed by the same people. One was opened in '38 and the other in '55. And so they had the expertise to do the work. We were having a deck that was separating from the floor beams, and this was the reasonable solution for dealing with it. So what gets replaced, again, if we were to take and remove all of the components at once, if we had shut the bridge down and said, okay, we're going to take the 18 months and get it done, you would have seen us remove all of the steel structure from the cable bent here to the cable bent over D&D. So all of that structure and all of the hangars. All that would remain would be these large towers and the main cable. Everything else eventually will be replaced. The why, largely, it's a 60-year-old structure. There is deterioration. You can keep on replacing pieces of steel bit by bit. One of the big difficulties is if you were just to try to replace the road deck by itself, and you take the road deck off and you end up having to do work on the beams that are underneath of it, how do you do that overnight? We talked earlier about the fact that in 1994, when I joined the Bridge Commission, there was 28 million crossings. Today we're dealing with closer to 33 million crossings. In a lot of areas, by the way, in North America, growth far exceeds that. You know, the friends who operate facilities in Texas, the friends who are operating facilities up and down the eastern seaboard, they're seeing growth rates that exceed that quite significantly. So for us, we can't have one of these bridges shut down for an extended period of time. Back in 2000, after we finished the third lane project, we had to resurface the wearing surface on the McKay Bridge. We had enough sense to give the public 1 year of reprieve. We didn't jump from 1999 into 2000 doing the paving. We said, let's take a year off and let it rest. In 2001, we started doing the asphalt. We closed the bridge for one lane the entire summer, and then off-peak, we would close the second lane on the McKay Bridge. Doing that work during the daytime and work day up at the McKay Bridge was painful. Today, it would be unbearable. I would have to unlist my phone number. I would have to find a place to hide. But the volume of traffic we have today does not permit us to do work in these bridges by having either one of them closed during the business day, at least with the current usage of the automobile as it is. Some would say maybe we should use it as an experiment to create huge change because you give the public no other option. Anyway, this deck has been separating from the floor beams. Underneath here, we were taken to actually welding the pan that holds the floor deck back onto the beam and putting in grouting to stop it from moving up and down. If you, before we started this project, driving across the bridge, you would notice significant undulation, and that's where the road deck was pushing away from the floor beams. So what's the status? We closed the sidewalk and bike lane at the end of June 2015. Our commitment to the active transportation community was that 18 months was the period of time for which we would have that closed. We spent a lot of time working with the engineers trying to figure out how we could keep either the bike lane or the sidewalk reopened during the project. I would say that they spent a couple of months working on that to consider all the possibilities. It was said at one point that it possibly could have been done, but it would have to extend the overnight closure beyond the 10.5-hour period for the segment replacement. And then it got to the point where that they felt that they couldn't deal with the additional weight out there for that period of time on the old segments, and so they ended up saying no to it. For us, that made it much more difficult. What do we do? That slide comes next. So the segment replacement started just about a year ago. It went slower than we had anticipated. We had issues with the global geometry of the bridge. I said to the engineers, what do you mean global geometry? Well, essentially how the bridge performed. 2 towers, 2 cable bents, main cable, you take a segment out, it didn't respond the way they expected it to. They had challenges. In terms of the amount of jacking they had to do on the bridge to create enough space to get the new segment back up and in place was beyond what they had anticipated. Working on a weekend and basically reaching the end of the permittable jacking loads that the engineers had said they could do, and there's not enough room. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to stop and do some calculations and figure out, okay, we believe it's safe, keep on going. And so this was part of the global geometry challenges we had, and that's why we had slower progress occurring during last September, October, November, December. As of the end of July, well, back in March, we worked with American Bridge, came up with an alternate approach, and said the overnight closures are taking too long. They haven't gotten it down to the 10.5-hour component, so we're going to have to do something different. And we looked at going with weekend closures and replacing 2 segments a weekend. That way you had closer to 60 hours to deal with it. We got some wind in our sails, and it's been working quite well. The end of July, we had 30 segments put in, and the time from the end of July till now has been focused on getting the welding done, because I have to weld all of the segments together and have that inspected and signed off. And they are now ready to start the paving. The sidewalk removal, one of our nice little stories that come out of this project. John Eppel, who's our chief engineer, came up with the idea of repurposing the bikeway and sidewalk. So he put out an RFP, and HRM picked up, I think, about 2/3 of what was out there for the grand price of $1. And those segments are for use, being repurposed for bridges and pathways throughout HRM. The balance of the segments were picked up by the Nova Scotia Snowmobile Association and Nova Scotia Trail Association. And they'll be positioning them throughout the province and using them on projects that they have. Shuttle service, tumultuous ground. It was a little bumpy getting started. First of all, we PO'd the cycling and pedestrian community, and it was like, okay, a shuttle service, you think? And we got it going. Our budget was 1.5 million. I think we're running close to 1.7, 1.8 million. Don't buy GM buses with diesels in them. I'll tell you that much. But it's been a success. Once we got it up and got it going, we built up our experience with it. Did some fine tuning. I think the first day we were operating, we actually dropped somebody's bike in the middle of the toll plaza, and we took care of that, Bill. These trailers, by the way, they're meant for touring, touring groups. So you take a bike off once a day and put a bike on once a day. We take them on and off repeatedly. We essentially have had to rebuild these trailers. If you want a good bike trailer, when it's all over with, they've been well built by now. Oops, pointing the wrong way. Here was some of the repurposed bikeway, sidewalk that's been used. The fabrication, another one of our successes. Halifax, or I should say Dartmouth, is most likely one of the 2 or 3 locations in North America where these segments could be fabricated. Otherwise, the option was to go to China or go to Asia. It could be Korea, it could be China. Then you get into the risk of shipment damage that has occurred in the past. Then you get into the issue of quality control. That has been experienced in the past. Anyone here know Danilo Gasparotto? Ever meet him? He's a true Italian. He can't talk to you without touching you. It's like, Steve, how you doing? And when we were doing the 3rd lane project, I'm out in the middle of the bridge, and we're about 3/4 done, and he gets beside me and he's elbowing me. He goes, "What do you got to do this thing? You got to do the whole thing." And anyway, when we decided to go ahead with the project, I called him up and said, "Danilo, you got your wish. We're going with the project." Our challenge, though, is that we can't hand this project to the local folks. We're sure as heck hoping they get it, but it was a competitive bid with American Bridge, and they were successful. What the Cherubini Group does is they're not a bulk steel fabricator. They're not the folks who will produce 3,000 tons for you at the cheapest price going. These are the folks who like technical challenges. They like doing the complicated. This is where they bring the value, and they sure got it with this. It was interesting. These segments are 60 feet wide by 60 feet long. They weld all of these plates together to create a deck big enough for that. Then they turn it upside down, and they're going to put the troughs on it, the corrugated sections, and weld them in place. And then what they do, and I guess engineers who deal with steel know this stuff, but they actually torque the corners of the plate so that you bend it. So after the welding's complete, when you relax it, it's in the position that you desire it to be in. Anyway, more complicated. I'm not an engineer. It's more complicated than what I deal with. The The segments were fabricated, the first 30 were 60 feet by 60 feet approximately. The last 16 are only half size. They're 60 feet by 30 feet. They're being installed over Department of National Defense. That complicates life a little more. And we don't have the ability to lift from below, so they're coming in from above. These are the segments in the paint shop down there. For those who are interested, the company that went bankrupt doing the painting tried to lien the project, and the courts have decided that the bridges are public roadways, and so they weren't able to lien us. The paving also occurs down here. It's a product called Chemco. It occurs in a tent pretty much the same as this. It's an epoxy material they put on at a very high temperature. It actually can cool off a fair amount. The important thing for the wearing surface when they put it on is that the aggregate's warm enough. They heat it up in something equivalent to a coffee roaster, and when the aggregate's hot enough, they broadcast it on top of this epoxy material, and it fills in and settles in. Then they roll it. What they put on initially was only 3/16 of an inch thick. The first 3 segments, they didn't have it quite right. We had some premature failures out on the bridge itself. That was overcome, and the rest of the segments worked well. A moment of faith, cutting the first segment. It's once you start, there's no stopping, and it's a little intimidating. Anyone here see the first segment being replaced? Any of the cutting that was going on? It was fireworks up there, and you could hear the molten metal hitting the water, which, by the way, is now has to be in a controlled state because we're over D&D. And the last thing you want to do with D&D is burn down their fire department. This is another photo. Safety is everything with us on this project. We had safety meetings with the companies before they bid the project. You know, it's our goal is to have nobody injured on this project. There have been some injuries. There have been a couple of lost time incidents, nothing major, but it's a continuous focus, and we're pleased with how it's gone so far. As I say, safety, a disaster is only 5 minutes and one bad decision away. You can never be complacent with safety. I said it would be a spectator sport. Folks sitting here enjoying the view of the first segment coming down. This one was a little tricky because they had to bring it down just a little bit. Then they actually had to move the whole thing sideways so they could clear the tower and the scaffolding and come down. There's a new segment going up. So timeline moving forward, the 30th segment was put in July. The gantry had to be moved from the Halifax main span to the Dartmouth side span. The lifting gantry had to be modified. The segments now, you've seen undoubtedly seen the large cranes that have gone up. These cranes will be taking the segments off the barge, putting them on land, then being lifted from land up to the top of the bridge deck, put on a transporter there. These transporters are actually operated by an individual wearing a vest with controls on them, and they walk along with it. So it moves at walking speed. They'll take it across the bridge. Then they actually they've gotten permission to use some of the D&D lands for storing them, so they're going to take them off the bridge over there, put them back down on the ground again, store them down below. This way they'll have segments in place ready to go. Weather conditions aren't as big a challenge on weekends. For the first couple of weekends in March, we were delayed 2 weekends in a row because of high wave action and tidal action here in the harbor. They couldn't transport the segments. So weather can be a bit of a challenge. The Dartmouth side span and main span jacking, that's largely occurred now. When we realized that, when we're doing the planning for this project, one of the engineers said, well, do you want to raise the bridge anything additionally to what it is now? And it was kind of like, oh, we can do that. How much can we do it by? They said, well, we can give you an extra, they did their calculations, they came back and said, we can give you an extra 2.6 meters of clearance at center span. So we called D&D, or not D&D, we called the Port Authority and said, are you interested? They said, yes. So we said, we'll come back with a price. And I think it's about $1.7, $1.8 million. They agreed to pay for it, and we're lifting the bridge. So for those of you who run across the bridge for MacPass miles, your old times won't be your new times. It's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. Don't tell that to the fast guys. We'll just let them see if they figure it out. So the span jacking has largely occurred for the Dartmouth side span and main span. The Dartmouth side span and main span to be paved. That's going to occur this weekend. It's scheduled to occur this weekend. The weather is not good enough. We're not going to have good weather both Saturday and Sunday, so we're expecting or hoping that they will get one side of it paved, or I should say a lane and a half paved this weekend. That will give us a taper in the center lane for the next week until they get back out there and pave the second half of it. Replacement of the Halifax side span segments is scheduled to begin right now around October the 14th. They've got 16 to do. They will only be putting one up the first weekend. Thereafter, they hope to put up 2 per weekend. They're hopeful that they can get up to 3, and even contemplating the concept of doing as many as 4 in a single weekend. Mother Nature this time of the year starts to become more of a challenge, and they want to get it done as rapidly as possible. The last segment is scheduled to go in by December the 17th, and then they'll be working feverishly to complete the welding for the sidewalk and bikeway so that they can get the final paving on out there, and we can safely open the bikeway and sidewalk within the 18-month schedule that we had originally committed ourselves to, and that'll be the end of December. Yeah, that's what I just said. Replacing the hangars. We've changed the profile of the bridge. Previous to this, or with the original construction, the road deck was sitting on the bottom beam of the truss, and now it's shifted so that the road deck will be sitting on the top of the truss. And the truss is not as high as it used to be. It was, I think, about 16 feet. It's now shrunk down to about an 8-foot range. Thus the hangars are different lengths, plus it's time to replace them anyway. So they expect to replace all the hangars within 1 month. We're thankful for that. It'll get them out of the way. Next May, hopefully a long weekend in May, weather conditions will be such that we'll go out and do the paving on the side span. And final completion for September 2017. Part of the work in here that hasn't been mentioned yet is another opportunity that's come along we're taking advantage of, and that's installing dehumidification on this bridge. The main cables are about 12 inches. They are a series of wires that are spun into strands. These, I'm not sure, it's 60 strands are bundled together. Then they're wrapped with, first of all, there's grooved cedar wood strips that are placed on them. Back in the day, they were all coated with red lead. Cedar strips that were soaked in linseed oil were packed against them, and then they had a spinner that spun galvanized wire around them. And then after that was done, they were painted. Our intent is to leave all of that in place. We've opened the cables on a number of occasions and inspected them and see how they are. You do that by taking a 16-foot segment, unwrapping it all, taking nylon wedges and prying things apart and going in and checking on the conditions. The conditions of the main cable that we've inspected to this point in time have been very good. And so now the insurance marker we're taking out is to wrap the main cables in a waterproof membrane. It'll be put on in sheets. They put an electric blanket over this and heat it up and bond this material to the main cable so that it's ideally waterproof. And then you take dry air. You set up a dehumidification plant. You take dry air and pump it into one end of the main cable and draw the moist air out the other end. The idea is that if you get when you do get the moisture content down low enough, that basically you will arrest corrosion, that it will stop. The trick thereafter is to keep doing enough inspections on it to make sure it's achieving what it's supposed to. This will be the second bridge in North America that this has been done on. This was first started by the Japanese. This past spring, we actually had an International Cable Supported Bridge Operators Conference here, and the gentleman who designed the first dehumidification system was here making a presentation. So we will have the first dehumidification system in Canada, the second in North America, and it's ideally what helps us maintain those main cables. You can replace a whole lot of parts on the bridge. The main cable is one of the tougher pieces to do.
Steve, can I just ask you what's hanging on the hangers? You were mentioning hangers.
That's a working platform. That's the long blue structure. If you want a permanent image of that, you come down here to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and buy yourself a beer. And the local company, Brightwood Brewery, have got a beer called The Big Lift. And it's a ceramic German made bottle, and on the front of it is the image of the Big Lift project with those travelers on the hangers. It's fairly good detail. Communicating through the Big Lift. It starts with meetings like this. We've been doing this frequently. I've been extremely complimentary to our communications staff because I think they've done a great job. They get out early, they get out frequently. We started talking about this project in the public, I would say, at least 4 years ago. And so that was 2 years before we were commencing the work on it. To date, they've got a number of things that they've done. We've had the website. We have our own email. There's a phone number for you to call. Social media, I'm not big into tweeting, but there appears to be a fair amount of it going on. Our staff have been fairly responsive. It becomes a 24/7 job when you get into it. We have an app that's good for both smartphones and iOS and Android. I'm not sure if BlackBerry still counts anymore after the announcement yesterday. And that's available from our Big Lift site. I got this Christmas card this year. Yeah, I was just a little kind of breathless. On the back of it, it's one of the reindeer, and he says, "I told him he should have got the app." Thank you very much, and we've got one more video. If we could play that, please.
Movie trailer.
You expect James Bond to come flying through there somewhere, you know? Journeyman is a local production company, and we're astounded by what they produced for us. I actually had a little bit of a challenge. I think our budget for the video production is somewhere in the range of $120,000, $130,000. And some of our board members went, "Gulp, really? Do you think the public will think that's a good thing for us to spend that kind of money?" And my answer to them was, you can't conduct a $205 million project of this magnitude on this facility and not capture that for other people to see. And plus, I think it helps people understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with. I mean, cutting those pieces out of there. Last winter, I quite often don't leave the office until a little bit later, so I find myself getting home about the same time that the bridge is being closed and the iron workers are going out there. And I'm going, damn, it's cold tonight. And then realizing that there, a group of 30 to 60 individuals were going out on that bridge to spend the next 10 and a half hours out there cutting pieces out and doing this type of work. But anyway, if you need good folks, Journeyman's the folks to call. Just one other little piece before I open it up for questions. I know you folks are in the planning business, and we are too, simply by the fact that we own we own and operate a couple of bridges, or I should say we look after and operate a couple of bridges for all of you who pay the tolls. The MacDonald Bridge is now about 46 years old. This has to be done on the McKay Bridge is 46 years old. This work will have to be done on the McKay, we believe, in the next 20 years. Anticipation is 15 to 25, we're saying 20. What we're looking at today is there enough room up there to build an additional bridge next to it instead of going through this project? Because you can get yourself a better quality end product for about the same price if there's enough room to build another bridge. With computer rooms, when we put them in, I tell staff these days, if you ever put in a computer room, make sure you've got a room next door that you can switch to another computer room so that you can always switch back and forth. Because if you ever try to change out a large computer room, you know, today, and you're fighting with everything that's already there. So it's the planning ahead. Anyway, we're hopeful that there'll be enough room to twin the McKay up there, and at that time remove the old structure, because there's what we've seen, there's not enough room in our street system up there to handle the volume of what two bridges would bring in. So that's our presentation, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Speaking of the workers, will you be recognizing them with a plaque or anything of the names of the people who do that?
Usually on projects like this, American Bridge, their practice is coats and belt buckles. We had, and this hasn't been shared with anybody yet, but we had something produced several years ago that we give out on special occasions, and so I need to confer with my board that would be appropriate to do on this project. Back for the 50th anniversary of the opening of the MacDonald Bridge, we did recognize those who had built that bridge initially by constructing a ironworker statue. I love public art, and I think every city needs more of it. I like it when construction requirements for site development requires public art to be built in. If you ever get a chance, what city was I in recently? Denver, Colorado. Almost. I think Denver actually has more public art than Philadelphia does. But, you know, public art is important. So anyway, I'm getting off the topic of answering your question, but we did the ironworker, and something will be done. I'm not certain what will be done.
One other thing that impresses me about the MacDonald is at night, and how you had the lighting fixtures. I'm not sure what year they were installed, but it definitely made it a landmark 24 hours a day. What's the plan? Is there a plan to make it as iconic with nighttime lighting as well, with the new decking as well?
We will replace the lighting on it to a degree. When the lighting was put on in 1999, turned on about 7:30 in the evening on January the 1st, 2000. Quick little story, when we were doing the planning for that, we put some sample lights on it, went out in February and turned them on. I looked up and went, yeah, okay, I guess. Away I went. About 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the boardroom, and we had the lighting company supplied us with a computerized model, and I'm running it, and former councillor Cooper was looking at it and goes, "That's interesting, Steve. Are you planning on changing the color of the bridge to that lighter shade of green?" I went, "Oh." If you remember, the bridge used to be a very dark, almost dark forest green. Well, that just sucked in all the light. When we had those lights up there, I called my maintenance manager. I said, "Phil, can you change the color of the bridge in 1 year?" And he goes, "I'll give it a try." So we called our engineering firm, said, "Can you bring some color chips?" John Epple came over. John may have worked with some of you here. He's our engineer. John came over with the color chips. We closed the curtains in the boardroom, turned all the lights off, got under the boardroom table and used a flashlight and went, "That one." That's how we picked a new color for the bridge. So that's a heritage color, I'm sure it is. But no, we want to do the floodlighting again. We had lights all along the top cord previously to shine up on the main cable. We turned those off about 5 years ago, and nobody noticed.
No? Okay.
So low impact. We saved a lot of energy, and you know, just the uplighting looks real good. One thing I'd like to do is the George Washington Bridge has a bigger flag than we've got by far because it's a bigger bridge. But for us to put a larger flag up here, it becomes a safety concern because people put it up now. They climb up there, they take a flag, they put lines out. If you get any wind blowing, So I've gotten illegally, I got drawings from somewhere south of the border that shows how you do it otherwise. You build a tube, you put a flag in the tube, and it deploys out of there using lines and winches and all kinds of stuff, so you can do it safely without endangering anybody.
Just a question to do with transit, and it's obviously the bridge and the transit system have a relationship. There was talk about overall transit planning and what might be the best system. But set aside all the policy issues and all that sort of thing, just from a technical point of view, how would you fit the MacDonald Bridge to have a dedicated bus lane? There are 3 lanes, the one bus is dedicated lanes forward and back, and the same ones to the
Off the top of my head, take a look at the travel time across the bridge. I think you consider doing convoy, and just keep reversing that center lane back and forth very quickly. Because otherwise, if you want a dedicated lane both AM and AM and PM peak, as you know, buses travel both ways in the morning. You can't put them on a HOV or HOT lane to get them over there, and then they're stranded getting back. So you'd have to do a convoy operation. We'd thought, if at some time in the future, if this city was to grow to the point where we were 1 million people and we needed a 3rd crossing, that, you know, if one was built down off the Cirque, that most likely should be a 6-lane bridge. You could take the McKay and make it into 2 lanes for HOT, or no, HOV, sorry, HOV, and you could have 2 lanes in that bridge, and it's part of a bigger loop. So if you want to do looping, that combined with the railroad cut, you could build a significant transportation system. I grew up in Gunningsville, New Brunswick, and I've been impressed by what the folks in Moncton and Riverview have done with their spoke transportation system. Seems to work. So
It's a 2-year project, and how many people would be involved with that, and how many local companies?
it's about an 8 to 9 year project in total for us. Yeah, my hair used to be dark. Number of people employed. We did an economic analysis with the province shortly after we awarded this, because we had to know where the dollars were being spent. I think the economic return to the province of Nova Scotia is somewhere in the range of 78%, which is very, very significant. That's a high number, given what a lot of projects deliver. I believe that there are about a dozen people from the U.S. who are here working on site. Otherwise, you know, the folks who are working here locally are local. The biggest sub on this is Cherubini. Then we're looking at Cahill doing electrical. Merritt has been doing some work out here for us on it. I know I've got another presentation with about 7 or 8 companies named, and I'm not remembering them all right now. But yeah, this project is a huge success for local content. Also, Canadian steel. I was a little surprised by that. I was expecting maybe Italian or Brazilian, Canadian steel in this job. Okay. Well, thank you very much, folks.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
Steve, on behalf of LPPANS and everyone in the group and everyone in the room this afternoon, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Thanks for keeping us up to date. And every time I cross the MacDonald Bridge, I say a little prayer and thanks to the engineers. So thanks very much.
Thanks to the engineers. My pleasure.